I'm Cassie Estrett with Music for Your Inbox, and today I'm going to invite DesoDuo, which is Katie Eikam and Kevin Good, to join us to talk about the sound film that we made with them for this month. And Katie is also our postcard artist, so she'll be able to talk to us a little bit about how she came up with the visual art component that is being mailed out to people as we speak. All right, I will now invite them to join me.
Hey,
Hey, how are
good.
you?
How are you?
Good. It's good to hear you.
Hey,
There we go.
yeah.
Hey,
The
give me
magic of the internet.
1 sec to grab a headphone jack.
Awesome. Anyways, we can chat about your visual art while we're waiting, Katie. I happen to have a few postcards here. So if it's all right, I'd like to start with showing the visual art that we have for this month following. It's called Begin Again. And we have this, I'm just going to put it directly in front of my face. And we have this beautiful postcard, which also acts as a score for the video this month that we're calling Trails and Topographies. And you can see there's some small little line drawings on it, as well as this beautiful photograph of a leaf. So, yeah, I was wondering, Katie, if you seem to be frozen, but perhaps you're not. Um, if you could talk to us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for this particular one. I know that you have a practice of making graphic scores, but how did this one come to be?
There you go.
You're back.
There you go. Yeah, so for the score, normally when I create these, we're on a hike or on a walk around the neighborhood, something, and I always lay the leaf or flower or whatever the natural object is on a blank piece of paper. And then usually I try to avoid writing on the leaf or the natural object. Because I never want to overpower the object. But in this case, I actually, for what it was, I stepped on the leaf and then used kind of the tracings of the pen to uh, create some of those designs. Partly because our whole theme had to do with overpopulation and walking in an overpopulated area. It felt fitting. And so it's hard to see, but some of the designs actually go across on top of the leaf. So it was,
Oh, yeah. I've got a bigger square. I can kind of show that
yeah.
more easily so that you can see how they go right on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I obviously know exactly what you're talking about. I think to explain to other people, this particular pairing of the visual art and the sound and the video has to do with a specific place, which is called the Eaton Canyon, which is not too far from where the three of us are right now in Pasadena. And Katie, you actually pointed out to me that there was this article on Fodor's, which is the travel website, and this whole San Gabriel monument was voted by the website to be like on the no list, as in do not visit this site, and not because it's not beautiful and a really great place to be, but more because exactly as you said, the level of human intervention in this space is it's too high and it's taking away from the beauty and actually kind of destroying the natural environment. Um, so it was a tricky piece to make, I think, because it's like, don't visit this place, but then visit it to record it. It's big. So, and I know that Jen and I thought a lot about that when we were thinking about the visual, like the film component of it. And so one way that we were solving for that was by not actually going all the way to the waterfalls, which is sort of the spectacular end to this, and to um take our still image, not our still image, but the static video from the very entrance to the park where it still is actually relatively untouched by humans. And we went there with Kevin and we kind of picked a nice spot and we could see that there were hikers, but we weren't actually like going down there. But then I really do feel like the audio recordings you took of the end of that trail that sound almost like a farmer's market on a Sunday or something. I mean, there's just so much. I feel like you almost had to do that just to illustrate to people what is happening.
Yeah, the people pollution and the noise pollution. I thought we were going to Disneyland when we went. It was just loud, and by the time we got to the end of the trail, it was people were selling stuff, and there's a whole market at the end of the trail, not anything but nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I know I went with Kevin a different time, but we went during the weekday, at like 8 a.m. or something on a Wednesday. And so at that time, we were able to, we were kind of the only people for about half an hour. And then it started to get busy. And then he was explaining to me, like, oh, that overflow parking lot is usually like completely necessary. Um, so anyhow, I do feel like you all treated it delicately with this sort of education viewpoint, but also the sort of not, I mean, you weren't also selling things at the end of the hike. And also, I think the argument that Fodor's list was making was not so much asking people who live there not to visit, but more asking people not to treat it as a destination. Um, and that it's tricky for people who are living in the urban areas like us to find these natural spaces. And this is in your backyard. This is kind of your space. Not that any natural land belongs to anybody, but it's a place that is supposed to be served by the parks for the residents, and it's just kind of exploding with people. Mind you, there's a lot of residents there too. So
Yeah.
anyhow, politics aside, um, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more. So, Katie, you created this score. You've got the leaf, and it's got some traces on it, and there's you stepped on it to sort of provide kind of a template for where to trace. And then the two of you interpreted the leaf score and created this piece of music. Um, so maybe let's talk a little bit about how we made that piece of music. Kevin, do you want to start with the field reporting part?
Yeah, so um we started with field recording and kind of the idea of combining both of the elements of what we do. Um so there's a couple of melodies based on some pieces I write while hiking trails. Um as well as another piece I write called The Chords in My Life that uses chords as like representations of people I've met or people that make an impact on my life. So we used the melodies plus the chords of the people involved. So you and Jen and Katie's chords are part of our source material. Um, and I use those things to usually create some kind of sound bed or like scape or kind of idea um, with field recordings and tandems. So the idea was maybe we can lay down some kind of bed of sound, or moving but static line similar to the video, um, that would allow like an environment for a live interpretation of Katie's score to take place. So we started with some field recordings of Eaton, um, that, as you've said, really emphasize a lot of the human traffic, like volume, all the like kind of noise pollution that's going on. And of course, with an emphasis on like the people that are selling things and the stuff that you don't usually see out in the woods, or on a hiking trail, any of those kinds of things, and your classic like people walking with like beats that are like blasting kind of thing. So we kind of have that um juxtaposed with a couple of like rainy days where it is just more environmentally based, because simply people don't come when it rains. So there's a little bit of playing with that idea of the natural sound and then the sounds that have been created human wise over the last couple of years as more and more people are visiting the site. And then once that kind of groundwork was laid together with some longer sustaining percussion, some like bowed vibraphone ideas, um, we worked together to kind of create that bed for Katie's piece to exist. And then we got together, and we've done a few of Katie's graphics for us together. And we essentially worked out how we wanted to do essentially a live version of it. So if we were to perform this as a live performance, it would probably be the field recordings and the bowed percussion as like a fixed media track that would play, and then us doing kind of a duo live setup of sounds that is representing her score. Um, so the first thing we did there, if I'm not mistaken, Katie, was kind of figure out our sounds and how we wanted to move through your score. I know that tends to be where we start is, are we moving together? Are we interpreting the same way, or are we both two people that happen to be co-interpreting the same kind of score?
Yeah. I don't think we really told each other for this one what we were gonna do.
Yeah.
And we actually read different parts, which was kind of cool. So I think I'm trying to remember. I did like a lot of like this part as the like wood block with sounds. And you, Kevin, you start on this end.
I think I started on the leaf end, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you were kind of working towards the middle.
Up
Uh,
the direction.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we've been doing that a lot more recently with your scores because um unless we're doing like a giant interpretation of something that's like an hour, at least for me, they're like really beautiful and really dense in terms of like material and how fast I want to move through it. I just want to be like sitting on a leaf for so long that it feels like when we started it in the same spot, a lot of the times we end up with either um for me feeling rushed or not getting through the whole thing. So I agree. I like not starting in the same spot because it feels like the best way to do like, well, if you do half of it at this spot and I do the other half, we get the full picture, but we can like contain it in like a more reasonable time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when you're talking about like the sort of negotiation of each graphic score, which is one of the reasons I'm really drawn to performing those kinds of pieces, is that there's no it'd be like inventing a new political system every time you want to have a meeting or something. There's no hierarchy, there's nothing baked into it already. Whereas when you look at Western classical notation, um, I mean, that's part of the cheat code to it, right? If you want to do something really fast, then for sure, write some notes on a page, everyone's going to go boop, boop, and there you go. And I use that all the time
Yeah.
too. But for something like this, where you're asking people to think a little bit more ahead of time, and also where you yourself don't have a particular hierarchy or, oh, this is the lead percussion part, this is the subordinate part, this is the melodic part, this is the rhythmic or the textural part. And you're just really asking the performers to negotiate that between the two of them. I think it can lead to a more thoughtful performance. But then as the composer, you have to be really open to what can happen. I mean, I tell this story 1,000 times, but when I took a very short lesson with Christian Wolf when I was at CalArts, and I was showing him this text score I had, and he's like, "Well," because I was saying like, "Is this too much instructions or not enough?" And he was like, "I like to imagine what's the worst thing that someone could do with this information, and if I'm okay with that, then that's enough. But then if I'm not, then I have to add." And so I think a score like Katie's, what's the worst thing someone can do? I mean, it's truly could be awful, right? But you're not sharing your scores with everybody in the whole wide world. You're writing these scores for specific people and specific situations. So in that way, there's already this level of understanding built into it. I think famously in one of Christian Wolf's scores, it says something like, "Do not set any fires."
Mhm.
And I remember reading that and being like, "Oh, he imagined the worst thing." And he was like, "Right, someone could light these on fire." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not okay with that."
Yeah, yeah,
That makes a lot of sense. I remember similarly, um, at CalArts and Michael Pizarro's experimental music workshop, going to Placerita Canyon and doing a couple of the Christian Wolf Pro scores. And I know I can't recall if they're literally just called sticks and the other one is stones. Um, but I know the last instruction on those is don't break anything. And that tracks, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, because he was like going through it and being like, "What's the worst thing that could happen? Oh, this could happen, and I'm not okay with that. I will write
don't
those words.
cause harm.
Don't break anything, don't burn anybody." But anyhow, this is more about your music, but it's interesting to kind of think about the history of these sort of text scores and then also graphic notation, which is not exactly the history of text scores, but it's certainly running alongside that, just people looking for different ways to write down music for people to interpret. Um, I also I wanted to touch a little bit on the sort of explaining how the film was made. So we've got the two of you made your recordings and your bed tracks of the pitches from the chords in my life. Kevin, you kind of just glossed over that, but it's part of your practice that I always like to point out because it's kind of special. Where you write chords about or for people, and then it becomes their chord. And I'm curious, how many do you know how many you have at this point, or?
Um, Finished and done and cataloged is in the 500s. But it's definitely more than that.
Yeah.
There's like a there's a whole Google spreadsheet just to keep track of things.
Right.
Um,
And so typically what I do is I'll make them on an index card. Um, and then I have like a wooden box I keep them all in alphabetical order. And then just to make sure if I start to fall behind, which happens always, I have a Google spreadsheet of like, have I done this person's chord? What is it? And I can reference that. Um, which does mean that there's usually another pile that started but haven't completed. So they'll just be empty chords with like people's names on them. Uh, so that pile's gotten pretty big. But of the ones that are tracked, there's about a little over 500.
And when you're coming up with a new chord for a new person, are you thinking about their relationship to the other people who already have chords, or is it absolutely just for that one person without considering other ones?
Yeah, it's a good question. It varies, but there is for sure room for consideration. So a lot of the times, I don't try and do it artificially or musically based, in terms of hit material in relation to one another. Meaning like it's really built on a person's personality, and my relationship to them. Um, but as a result, some of my relationships to certain people, um, are of course in relation to other relationships they have. So most of my family, have chords and are considered uh, within relation to each other. So like my parents' chords are would be exact same pitches, just in different octaves. Um, so if they are people I think of together, or sometimes it can be as simply as like if it's a couple that I've met and I met them at the same time and in the same situation, then they will inevitably have similarly related chords. And then there are certain musical ideas that go into it in terms of the person. So a lot of the times, if I know the person is an instrumentalist and I've met them through music, and say they're like a violinist, I might put like the low G string as one of the chords, or one of the pitches for the chords, things like that. I have a couple friends that I met through like a certain piece of music that we played together or something that they're interested in. The easy anecdote I always have for that one is Richard On and Wells Lang played Barrios Linnea with us, and that's how we met both of them. So both of their chords have that C sharp and E, that starts that piece. So sometimes it's like that, and sometimes it is just totally a gut feeling of
Yeah.
this person is making me think of usually this intervallic relationship, and there's something to that personality, and maybe this like deep booming voice reflected in the chord or things like.
Yeah, it's a neat practice because it um just kind of goes on, and it's not something that you need to start or stop at any particular point. I like projects like that. Um, I could see you, I don't know, with 10,000 of them over the course of your life, or I could see you being like 600 in it.
yeah,
Just sort of deciding the duration
it is.
or how long that will go.
Fun. So at least for now, I don't see any end in sight. But I say that with the caveat of knowing full well that at some points, as I said, there are relationships and you can see them very easily. Like you see two people in my family and they have a last name.
Right.
Uh, but I fully anticipate that at some point I'm going to run into artificially creating relationships that I didn't intend just by pure number of chords.
Yeah, well, you can definitely like sort of like accidentally. I mean, Jen and I are working with an artist for a film coming out in 2025, and we were coming up with visual artists that might go with them, but we hadn't seen their final film, and we came up with this artist who was doing some kind of screen prints that involved bananas somehow, not about bananas, but there was bananas. And then I just got the film this morning, and the video artist is literally eating a banana for half the video. So I wrote to them and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be too many bananas or like just take yes for an answer.
Yeah.
But I can see how you can, it just gives you different ways of thinking about people. We have a comment from Cecil, who's over in Arizona, right? Running Harmonic Ooze, and they're saying, curious about chords for groups of numerous people and bodies as collective personhood. You mentioned parents, but I'm wondering how wide that could become for you. So it's like thinking about, well, you know everybody in my family kind of thing. Like, would you assign things like that are related to our chords, or would you think about like people you went to Cal Arts with at the same time, or if you wrote like the entire readers chorus? I mean, I suppose because people are so complex and we have so many different kinds of relationships, I suppose you're sort of assigning, kind of like examining one particular value of that relationship when you're assigning the chord, because of course they can't be all things to everybody all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does get pretty wide. And um like I use parents as an example, but of course like my entire family of extended cousins and aunts and uncles all have some kind of relationship. It's usually like a chord or an interval that's in common. And displacing octaves or adding other elements of different notes that not everyone has. And then in some cases, a lot of the times, it's very loosely based on like genealogy. So like you and your husband both have chords that have some shared commonalities, but are not the same pitches. And then in your case, your kids have different chords, but utilize some of the notes from each of your chords and the ones that are kind of unique. So you have a unique chord, he has a unique chord, and then from there, new chords were created with combinations of both.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
And sometimes that also is like octave displacement.
right.
Makes it a little easier to do like parents are up or are in a
The lower
lower.
Right.
octave, kids are
Right.
the higher octave.
Of course,
Is
all
most
my
of the
kids are going
time.
to be taller than me in about 10 minutes, so we can do some reorchestration and revoicing as the time goes on. Cecil said thanks.
Yeah, of course.
So, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about the visual part of it, for the video, and how we sort of worked on that together when Jen and I first were coming up with this, like when we wanted to have your stuff on our platform because we like what you're doing and we wanted to highlight it, and especially to have Katie's graphic score going along with the music. We just felt like that was something really interesting, that our platform can actually showcase. And so then we were thinking about what would the video part be, and we had these like, long chats about animation, and we were talking to Katie about different kinds of animation, and of course, I personally know how long animation takes and how our budget works, and knowing that we probably would not be, unless somebody was like an animator who this was their passion project for 3 years, was not going to be able to animate this. And so we were coming up with different ideas of stop motion and this and that. And we landed on this idea of, well, originally we were going to take the image from the Eaton Canyon that we took together and um, build like throughout the film, add garbage and add detritus and different collected pieces of old objects and stuff to sort of remake the entire scene in garbage. And that was, the plan. And then we were leaving Eaton Canyon, and Jen and I were realizing, like, first of all, that'd be really hard to do because how are we gonna project it? Just boring production stuff. But then Kevin was like, it feels like it might be more hopeful if we were to remove the garbage as opposed to just fill the world with garbage, and was talking about how that's more just within the ethos and the vibe of Deso in a way, which is that you're making a lot of art about nature and about the world, but you're not necessarily looking at it as this really pessimistic view or even just um dwelling on all of the sort of super sad stuff. But instead kind of celebrating a lot of the beauty. So that was a big shift for Jen and I artistically, and we're really grateful to have the input. And so that's what we ended up doing was collecting trash that was sort of the same colors as the space. So there was clouds and sky and trees and plants and stuff. And then we laid it out on the floor and had the video for reference so we could see like where to put all the items. And then we thought it'd be nicer to have kids' hands doing it than adult hands. Like, first of all, they just fit more easily in the shot, and secondly, it's kind of leaning towards that. Like we've called your music, music is beacon, so it's sort of like this beacon of hope of maybe we are going to be obviously not just picking up garbage is going to save the planet, but it was sort of a kind of a what am I looking for? An allegory for how that's going to work. So we had my daughters um both of them lying on their stomachs, sort of pulling out the garbage. And it was neat because we were playing the audio at the same time. Um, so they were really following the pacing of your music throughout. With Jen and I, of course, being like, don't move your hand too fast or you'll mess up the green screen. But no, they were really listening like closely and kind of moving together and then pausing and then collaborating on some pieces. And but much in the way that your layer of live instruments was a performance, this was very much a performance. It wasn't highly edited in terms of like cutting out bits where they put their hands down and stuff, because of course it's just one gesture of having all the trash there to begin and then just removing it. Um, what did Tony saying? I think the obstructions of the production can a lot of times influence the art and other conscious decisions. And yes,
Absolutely.
that and I totally true.
That also was reflected in our recording kind of unintentionally. Because we started with the recording primarily that was like at the waterfall. So the most population dense where all the people were selling stuff. And then the nature of hiking out means, as similar you were saying to your video, as we got closer to the entrance, there's less foot traffic, there's less noise pollution, and that kind of thing. And then we ended from there with the video of when we took rain, or the recording of when we took rain. So it also did kind of reflect the audio base of much more like trash slash noise um kind of got to work and move together up. So pleasantly optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah, but I thought it was neat, and it was a piece that was like a lot of patience too that I thought
Mhm.
I really appreciated from the both of you, just being really intentional and just, like taking your time and considering it, and then giving us the time to think of through all the different like ways of accomplishing what we could accomplish, because we really wanted this to be a very specific video, and we kept thinking about other video artists and then immediately thinking of like, oh, but we if they did, like, like that's sort of the test of what would be the worst that would happen, and be like, oh, what if they do this or they do that, and it's like, okay, well, we should be doing ourselves because it's like
It's a good
very
solution.
right. I mean, it takes longer, but in the end, I think we're really happy with it. And I just think that this is a unique piece. We're actually going to be featuring it in the Los Angeles Public Library starting next Wednesday, or actually, no, this Wednesday. Sorry, I don't know what day it is, but yeah, I'm going to be dropping off some of your art prints at the Eagle Rock branch and the Arroyo Seco branch, and then they're going to drive them in a van to Porter Ranch and Robertson. So 4 branches of the Los Angeles Public Library will have your prints available for people to pick up for free. And then, of course, there's a QR code on the back that links to the video that we've been talking about. So, so lots of ways to experience this art. But I feel like this is sort of hyper local. It's really special to be able to put it into East LA libraries because they are. Um, I mean, people know where the Eaton Canyon is, from there. And in fact, I think it's the altitude Pasadena Library right now is presenting a whole work about Eaton Canyon, where there's a visual artist who has painted these paintings of things from the Eaton Canyon. I don't know like all the specifics of it, but I was going to go to the opening of that because it just seems like it's an area that's really sparking a lot of people's interest. And it's very neat when a lot of artists are talking about the same thing. Yes, Tony, you're right. We have distribution. We're working towards getting into 2 Pasadena public libraries so that we can be, because that's officially our address. It's in Pasadena, and so we'd love to be really supporting our community. And this particular piece, I think, is really impactful to that particular neighborhood. Um, I was thinking a lot about when we were making the video, trying not to stomp on, which is hilarious because that's how Katie started the whole conversation. But try not to stomp on your music because I think we should mention that it's patient and that it's thoughtful and that it's not grabbing you by the neck and forcing you to pay attention. It's not, as I like to say, like new music because I often listen to when I was James Tenney's archivist, I had to listen to a lot of I got to listen to a lot of these recordings and sometimes people were playing music of his, in the 80s or 90s and they're like, it's new music. So there's like an accent on every note or something. You'll think, okay, just intonation. So, but theirs is the opposite of that. I think it's more subtle and it's kind of luring people in. So we were really careful when we were making the video not to make something that was gonna make the music feel like a second class piece of art. But I hope we achieved it, but where we have the visual and the audio just on par with each other. Um, and I'm curious when you watched the video, did you hear things differently just kind of seeing it, or was it too hard to get out of your own head because you made the piece in the first place?
I think yes, and at some points where I think because we did the audio, I think maybe like a month or two. I don't know how long it was between the video and the audio. But there was parts I had forgotten about that we did, and so when I saw the video, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is really nice. This fits." It just was collaborative, and it didn't combat at all. So it was nice to hear things like stick out because of some of the visual representation that maybe you missed, or maybe it was just because there's so much going on in the audio that maybe got overshadowed by our own sound.
Yeah, I think sometimes the visuals were kind of, at least for me, they would bring my attention to something because the girls, of course, were listening to things I wasn't listening because there's different people, right? So they're like, "Oh, when that bell comes in, I'm putting my hand out here or something," and I'm like, "What? Oh, that bell." So, so that was nice too. Anyhow, and of course, some of your own personal trash ended up in the video. The kid would year and delivered the day before. Um,
Shoot.
that was really nice too.
Yeah, there
Anyhow,
was.
Oh, I was just gonna say there's something interesting for me because I went with you and Jen to record the video. Um, but there's like kind of multiple levels in my head of um the video reflecting the audio in a way that worked really, really well, and vice versa. Simply the fact that we made like the raw field recording idea, um, and that feels present from the video before the trash, where it is just like a visual, um, somewhat non-stagnant photograph, and then an audio version of a non-stagnant photograph. Just kind of two things. Um, and then there's like a layer on top of literal garbage or sound garbage that is reflective of both. And for me, being pretty deep in the process of both the raw natural things, and then when it was done to see a lot of the garbage, I was initially thinking it didn't, but actually it really did change the way I heard certain things. And I think there's a level of interest to tricky things involving like, garbage in some cases is made from natural materials, and sometimes there is like natural like footsteps or tree branches and things, but also we used a lot of natural sounds to kind of replicate that. There are some like wood-based instruments. There are also some literal like moving of leaves and things like that in our live performance. So hearing those lines blurred and visually seeing them changed a lot of listening practices for myself. So yeah, that's cool.
Well, I think it's not so much that because we keep saying garbage, garbage, and things like that, but it's interesting because it's not like it's a lot of it's like things you can recycle, or one was like a medal that someone in my house got for a 5K or something like that, right? Like it's not officially garbage, but it's just sort of saying like we as humans are a little too much kind of thing. And that is similar to what you're saying. So it's not like we're just showing people like here's all your garbage, Some of it is like things that we had at our house, like, I think there's Q-tips in it or something like that, right? Like, it's not officially garbage, but you're just sort of when you see it all together like that, you start to understand a little better what they're talking about. And I think it's also important to say that none of the voices in your, recording are bad, these are, like, nice families out or a fun time on a Saturday afternoon, so but it's more just thinking about um, should we all go there on a Saturday afternoon kind of thing? And I think about that a lot. Like leaving space for other people, I guess is what I'm talking about. Um, like myself doing
Yeah.
that. um,
It made me think also, I think I was with you at Eaton on maybe not the time we did the video, but do you remember there was a person there, I don't think that worked for Eaton, but was just doing restoration of things, and was like, I think fixing the spots on trees that were like carved by people and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There was
and just
a
thinking
lot.
about
going on when we were there. There was also like a man who brought a bunch of children who jumped in the river and it was freezing cold and then they all had to walk back. Like, there were like
yeah,
choices being
absolutely.
made.
Yeah.
But yes, you're quite right, Kevin. There is an initiative from the community there, and there are people who are just picking up actual trash that they didn't bring in themselves. So it's not so much a video that's sort of shaking a finger at people and saying, "Look how bad you are," but it's more a video that's asking you to just think about things a little bit and to consider your role and your place and to sort of look at the aggregate as opposed to your only like, well, I'm hiking. Hiking is good. And possibly
Yeah.
going like one step further. Um,
Yeah, it's made me think a lot about like, oh, like, I think I on a personal level is just like, how need to remember to bring my reusable bags to the grocery store so I don't end up with like all you keep with that.
yeah.
The little things that end up going outside or whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, I mean, part of our library initiative, when we have the postcards in the library, was born out of the fact that we don't want to be throwing all our postcards in the garbage. So we're trying to like find other ways to, because the minimum order for postcards is 1,000. Um, and so we're finding other avenues and other ways for more people to have access to this art. So, anyways, so yes, I can hear what you're saying, Katie. Anyhow, I don't want to take up your entire holiday Monday. It's really fun to chat about this work. Um, but I think I'm going to sign off. And I want to say thanks for your time and thanks for your art. Okay, well, we'll speak to you soon. Take care, you two.
Thanks so much.
Okay, bye.